natural and maybe we might call it supernatural world, superlunary world anyway. And so sometimes issues that seem to be narrowly ethical or political have large ramifications in other areas. So we're animals, on Aristotle's view, at least a big part of us anyway. Maybe we have a little bit of the divine in us, or understanding, which we have talked about. But a large part of us is natural. So the natural world and the, as we think of it as the normative, political, ethical world overlap. And they overlap in more than one way. They overlap because we are animals, parts of the natural world. But they also overlap because Aristotle thinks, as many did really up until Hume, that the natural world is itself a normative world. There are natural norms. We can think that nature, Bernard Williams puts it this way, he says, nature doesn't send us normative telegrams, the only thing that, when it wants us not to do something that makes it impossible. But we might think that we could finesse that a little bit. In any case, Aristotle certainly does think that counts. So roughly speaking, Aristotle thinks that nature aims at the good, and when it fails to achieve it, there's an explanation for that. But by and large, natural means good. That entails good. We're going to ask ourselves how much of that we can buy if we don't buy all of it. Okay? So I'm going to wait to do introductions till next week. I want to sort of hit the ground moving, so to speak, so you have some idea what you're getting into, because you might decide you don't want to be part of it. That would be okay. You could decide that. But you have to know what you're going to be part of first. So let's imagine ourselves, as we often find ourselves in a class on Aristotle, as I did when I was undergraduate, being introduced to Aristotle via the Nicomachean Ethics, kind of cold. Here's the Nicomachean Ethics. It's a book by Aristotle. We're going to read it. That's the introduction. And then you pick it up, and you think, okay, so maybe I better read some of it. And so you start at the beginning, which seems like a good place. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to read a little bit of the introduction of the ethics, a little bit of the introduction to the politics, which are our main focus. And you'll need to bring copies of these with you in the future, because we're going to refer them, and it's hard to do that. I'd let you use electronic copies, but my experience with students of all stripes with computers, except for you, Minji, because I trust you, is that even the best of us get distracted by our computers. And so it's okay for me because I'm not distractible, but for everybody else, it's not good. So it's good to have paper copies, bring them, and as I said on the handout, you'll want to take notes and kind of build up a context. And I'm supposing, which to be true, but maybe somebody will tell me it's false, that nobody knows very much about Aristotle. Is that true? Or some people know a lot. Should I ask more precise questions? Who has taken a course on ancient philosophy before? Nearly everyone. And who's read Plato's Republic? Who has not read Plato's Republic? A lot of people have read Plato's Republic. What about the Nicomachean Ethics? Who has not read the Nicomachean Ethics? Oh, so actually you do, you're not neophytes entirely to those. That's good. Okay, so I won't presuppose that you are. Sometimes it's true that nobody's ever read a word of ancient philosophy, and so we're starting from square one. So we'll start from square two. So here we are reading chapter 1, book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Every craft and every method of inquiry, and likewise every action and deliberate choice, seems to seek some good. That is why they correctly declare that the good is that which all seek. So how anodyne is that? That is, it's very, usually what happens when you're reading a book, even a philosophy book, right, is that there's a the takeoff part, you're not paying too much attention yet. And then there's the part where you start to pay attention and then you tail off a little bit towards the end, right? So it's a bit like with shopping on the block. You know, you're walking, you don't pay attention to the first stores, then a little bit, and then it tails off again. So here's a question. What's going on in those sentences? Is much going on, or is this Aristotle kind of just getting you in the mood for something, but he's not really doing anything very much? Yeah. And that's going to depend on whether you think that craft, method of inquiry, action, deliberate choice, good, are terms of art or terms that you already understand because you speak English. Right? So if you think, suppose that I put the Greek in, suppose I said every techne, every methodos, and likewise every praxis, and every proteresis. Now you wouldn't think you understood, right? And you'd probably go, well, you'd probably give up. But you might go off to look out at a Greek dictionary or something to find out what do these mean. Or if you had notes at the back of the book, you might go off to see if the helpful translator had told you anything about these mysterious things. Now, almost everything that you run across, even things that look familiar, are technical terms for Aristotle. He is like Kant in having an elaborate technical vocabulary which overlaps ordinary Greek, but seldom just means exactly what. They're almost all, even if they're ordinary Greek terms, terms that have been tweaked to fit into an elaborate Aristotelian scheme. So, if you read as if, as I was taught to, as if it's quote-unquote common sense, which is what you often hear, right? Plato thought nature would spume the plays upon those weak time of things. Solider Aristotle played the tawse upon the bottom of the King of Kings. Right? That's the thought is that Aristotle is a nice guy like us, right? Not one of those airy-fairy Platonists who are always looking up there, but as in the Raphael stanza, Aristotle is holding out a school of Athens, holding out his Nicomachean Ethics, his hand down here. Plato is holding the Timaeus and looking up to the sky. Aristotle is solid. And that often conveys the sort of picture that which you often hear too, is that Aristotle is commonsensical. As much of the Nicomachean Ethics is supposed to be, well, something that you untutoredly might be inclined to agree with anyway, because like Aristotle, you're a commonsensical kind of person. And that's false. Right? That is false was something that really has emerged mostly after the Second World War, as the people who began to focus seriously on the Nicomachean Ethics, and especially on it, but also on other works of Aristotle, were not classicists, but philosophers driven by their own philosophical agendas, and began to actually try to make more than just ordinary sense of it. They wanted to understand it fully, and as they tried, they came to realize that they were in a world of rich and technical terms that they needed to understand. So Aristotle, like Kant, presents serious problems of understanding to someone who's just starting to read it, or maybe who's someone who's read it but in an undergraduate course, right? It requires commitment if you're to get anything really worth getting out of it. You can't be impressionistic with Aristotle. He's the least impressionistic of philosophers. He's a master, I think, with exceptions, maybe Hegel, there are a few, a master of what we would think of as methodology. Double entry bookkeeping methodology. You use something to explain this, you put it over here. Now you have to explain that, right? Everything goes that way. You start here, you use this to explain it, you move here, you use this to explain that, you move here, use this to explain that, you keep doing that until you reach something that you can, with plausibility, think that we can understand on its own terms. We can't define everything. Now we reach the kind of bedrock. We'll see that. in the passage from Metaphysics Thea that I handle. So that's the goal. We're in a massively self-reflective enterprise in which absolutely everything that's in things like the ethics and politics gets, or has already been, given a full, or what's imagined to be a full, explanatory account in something like the Metaphysics, or De Anima, on the soul, or somewhere else. And so Aristotle is drawing on these things, right, as things that are already understood. So when you pop into the Nicomachean Ethics, you're popping into a lecture that Aristotle gave in the Lyceum to students who'd already read, and not just read in the sense of, right, but actually come to grips with, had a good understanding of things like the physics, the De Anima, maybe some of the biological writings, some snippets of which I've given you, parts of De Anima, rhetoric, all kinds of things that were already on board. So the syllabus, or the curriculum, unlike ours, which is sort of supermarket-ish, right? You come in and pick what you want off the shelves. This is more like the old-style British store where you have to go in and ask for what you want, and they give you the part that they have, and then you go to the next store and get it. It's designed like a physics curriculum might be, where you start elementary and you get harder, right? You don't just plunge in. And that means that for us, plunging in really requires a lot of retooling, right? We have to kind of put ourselves back in the position of readers of these texts that were already equipped with a lot of their vocabulary. So being a helpful translator, I've provided this. So the goal of the editions that I've been producing of most of these texts is not to do what many do, which is to try to show how these things fit into our understanding of certain philosophical issues. So the thought is, here's the illuminated sphere, that's the sphere where we're doing philosophy now. Let's try to put those things into this sphere by translating them into our terms. I want to try to get you to understand them by showing you how Aristotle understood. So you read a note. Let's take a look, if you happen to have the Nicomachean Ethics with you. That's an old edition of the Politics. It's good, though. Not as good as the new one. That was the first thing I translated, so naturally it wasn't as good as the last one I translated, which is the Parts of Animals. So let's go to the notes. And they're if you've got the version, they're substantial. Moreover, in the case of the Nicomachean Ethics, the index is like an Aristotelian glossary on the terms that are in it. So it's not just like an index where you go in and it tells you all the places. It actually quotes all of the relevant little pieces of text, right, in the order in which they occur. So if you look up techne and under craft, right, it says, this is all the things that are said about craft. So you can start to build a repertoire of understanding. You're wandering through this whole territory of Aristotle with this term in mind, coming to understand it. And you need to do that, not for everything, but for the core key terms that we'll mostly be discussing. Okay, so let's go to if we go to the notes, which I'm scrolling to right now, we'll find a long set of craft, reference to Book 6, Chapter 4. It happens that's in the Ethics, and it's the focal discussion of craft in Aristotle. So we've got that in our. So we look there to see what craft is, and if you go there, you'll find a bunch of other notes about craft. Method of inquiry. A methodos is a way of inquiry, not very helpful. A hodos means a route or a road, as in the Nicomachean Ethics. So some sort of way of inquiry. So let's take a look at, I think I cut out happily the last sentence of Book 6, about Book 1, Chapter 1, Parts of Animals, but just go to it for a second. And go to the very last paragraphs on page, whatever it is. Well, the pages are hopefully not numbered. So it's the very end part of the text. On the handout called Parts of Aristotle, Parts of Animals. So just before the notes start, it's about 10 pages. Travel? Yeah. One should, though, show things. So Aristotle is trying to describe what proofs or showings or whatever should look like in natural, and what we would think of as natural science. And he says, one should, though, show things in the following way. And he goes through this little passage describing it. Now, in the last sentence, which got cut off, he says, this is the method of inquiry, right, for natural science. So a method of inquiry is not right this. So here's the natural science. And then when you ask, what method of inquiry does it do? You're stepping back and you're looking at the kinds of arguments it gives, and you're categorizing them according to kinds of arguments. So the method of inquiry, right, will tell you what kinds of arguments should be present in the science that you're studying. So when we read to the end of chapter 1 of book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, we'll be told that its methodos, its method of inquiry, is political science. So ethics has been absorbed into a different picture of politics or political science, which now has its own style of argument and proof. And in fact, the early chapters of the Nicomachean Ethics tell us what kinds of proofs and arguments we should be expecting in ethics. Not this kind, not this one, like this. Why? This is the nature of the subject matter, right? And so we have to look at it to see. So let's look at the very opening page of Parts of Animals. Are you all with me so far? Yeah? Gotcha. Anything you don't follow this? Sure. So, are you ready? So have a look at the opening page of Parts of Animals. So if you were thinking that you were reading a book called Parts of Animals, and then you read this, you might be a little surprised, right? Because it doesn't seem to have much to do yet with Parts of Animals. So let's look at it. Regarding every sort of theoretical knowledge, is that a new kind of notion? Yes. Theoria was different. And every methodological inquiry, well, we've got that already from, right, we know what a method of inquiry is. The more humble and the more estimable alike, is that a technical distinction? There appear to be two ways for the state to be, that is, the state of your knowledge. Right? One may be well described as scientific knowledge of the subject matter. Is that a technical notion? Yes. So again, if you look at the notes, note 1, at the end you'll see a very elaborate story, goes on for ages, of what a science is. Got a helpful little diagrams and all kinds of things in it. And you realize that, right, you're moving from one code to another code to another code, right? And so you have to try to internalize some bits of the code. So humble and more estimable, those are technical terms. We don't have to worry about them. We'll see a little bit about them later. But these two are ways of thinking about objects of knowledge and kinds of knowledge of them. So what makes a science more estimable than another is it deals with a more estimable kind of being. What makes beings more estimable? Well, right, that they're closer to starting points and first principles. Right? No, it's not a, gee, I like it, no, I don't, or isn't it, kind of aristocratic. No, it's not that. It's a special way of evaluating sciences in terms of how explanatory you think they are. Are they ultimately explanatory? So metaphysics, first philosophy, rather, Aristotle doesn't use the term. Metaphysics, the librarians of Alexandria invented it. Ta meta, ta physica means, well, the stuff that comes after the physics, we don't know what it is, but that's where it comes, so let's find it all together. We get our term metaphysics. Aristotle calls it first philosophy or primary science. And it's the science of being qua being, right? Beings as such, which is the broadest category of beings, things, ways the world is. And the science that deals with it is the most estimable, because it deals, well, ultimately with the most estimable being, namely God, not surprising. God, a very strange Aristotelian construction, which he defines as understanding, understanding, understanding. Right? Noesis, noesis, noesis. Thought, thinking itself, or right? That self-consciousness as such. Right? That's what God, for Aristotle, is. Impersonal, knows nothing about us, thinks only about itself, moves the heavenly spheres as an object of love. Very strange theology, but that's what makes theology the most estimable science. God is the best being, but he's the best being because the ultimately explanatory being. So we've got two ways a state can be, right, with regard to every theoretical science or knowledge and methodos. One is scientific knowledge, and the other is a certain kind of a sort of educatedness. Now this sort of educatedness is going to be quite important for ethics and politics, as we'll see. So we're going to get a little bit of what it is to be an educated person, a peipadumas, a well-educated person. For it's characteristic of a well-educated person to be able to judge accurately what is well said and what is not. For we consider someone who is well-educated about the whole of things to be a person of this sort, and we think that being well-educated consists in having the capacity to do what was just stated. That is, to judge whether or not the proofs or explanations given are of the right sort for that science. So think of it this way. Here's a very handy, just to see the political and ethical significance of it. It's very easy. Right? We know we live in a world of experts whom we consult about all kinds of questions. And our own epistemic authority in various areas is downstream from their epistemic authority. How do we know who the experts are? How do we choose the experts? Well, soi-disant experts, as we know, are no good. So if you look at them, they do about as well as chance. So all kinds of people who claim to be experts aren't really very much better than flipping a coin. How do we pick the good ones? Think of that as a political problem. Right? Who should the Senate or the Congress listen to on key questions where expert knowledge comes in? Climate change, for example. Who should they listen to? Well, we know the obvious answer to that question, right? They certainly shouldn't listen to scientists, right, who are ideologically contaminated in all kinds of ways. They should listen to people who have a lot of money invested in polluting industries because, you know, they're likely to tell you the truth about it. It's a big problem. And Aristotle's thought is this, as Plato says, to be a liberally educated person, that is, to be a free person in these areas, liberalis and these eleutherios, these are Latinate and Greek cognate terms, right? So a liberally educated person is a person educated to be liberated, free, right? Free not just of constraints, but free from the slavery to experts that comes if you're not able to select them. So, you know, if you can be enslaved epistemically as well as you can be enslaved in your actions and so forth. Right? Epistemic slavery is when what you should think is dictated by somebody else. Right? So you're free with respect to epistemically free. Not, of course, when you know everything. That would be great, but that's beyond our reach. Right? It's when you're able to make use of, right, the expertise in ways that don't enslave you to it. That's the goal. It's a wonderful goal, I think, and something that we've increasingly come to recognize as important. as people have been arguing, that democracy should be replaced by some form of epistocracy, because unless you have that, then you have idiots electing idiots with control over us, right? And so you can see how that gets its feet into the political arena. So the well-educated person is somebody who can look, has studied sciences, not in the sense of evaluating the truth of their outcomes, which they're not equipped to do, but able to evaluate whether or not these are the kinds of things that one should be listening to in this area. So that's the goal of becoming a well-educated person. And you can think of the Lyceum or the Academy as institutions devoted in that sense to liberal education that liberated, that made you free, both, give you a free mind. So we'll see in the politics that Aristotle will say things like, yes, you should study wealth accumulation and you should study household management, right? You need to study these things because they're part of what it is for you to be a free and autonomous citizen. He says, but not so much as to become caught up in them to the expense of other things, right? You don't want to become a narrow expert. You want to have the right level of grip on them. In the same way, you don't want the body of an athlete. That's fine if you're going to compete, but it's not the kind of body that a liberal, free person should have. You want the kind of body that equips you for the roles of citizen and other things, which included serving in the army and so on if you were in an Athenian city. Right? So you could be fined for getting out of shape, for example. Why? Well, because, look, suppose we have to fight the Spartans, and you're going to, give me a break, you can't even lift this. You've got to, right, that was the thought. Right? There's a role that the citizen or the moral agent or the head of household or woman or whatever play, and their virtues and excellences equip them to do that well, and you fall short of that if you don't do that. Right? So you can be blamed for not having the kind of body, right, everything else being equal, of course, right? Not having the kind of body that suits you to, or fits you to do well the role that the city requires of you as a citizen. So when we have militias and other things, people have to learn how to shoot a musket, right? No point in learning it on the battlefield, which I do it, right? You've got to know that already. Okay. But in one case, we consider a single individual to have the capacity to judge about, one might almost say, all things. In the other case, about a definite nature. So you can have this general educatedness generally, or you might have it in some areas but not in others. We'll see and use the same strategy in the ethics. For there might be another person with the same capacity as the one we've been discussing, but about apart. So it's clear in the case of inquiry into nature too, which is what we're doing in Parts of Animals, that there should be certain defining marks by reference to which we can appraise its way of showing things separately from the question of what the truth is, whether thus or otherwise. So we're not there to tell the physicist that these conclusions are false, right? That would require us to know physics. But what we're supposed to be able to do is to decide which of these contenders are worth listening to on matters of physics, medicine, whatever. So that's a very important part of the Aristotelian epistemic world, which to some degree is a world we've lost. Right? We've lost it in the sense that, so think about your own education through high school and college, and about what goals and ends you would think it served. How you, like you had some requirements, right? If you took some science courses, did they equip you to understand what scientific inquiry was like, how you should evaluate it? In some cases, where you took a lab science and one other, maybe you took very little, maybe you took a few math courses, right? It's fragments, and in part, right, we've made true by practice the fragmentation of knowledge that we then accept as a fact, right? So put it this way, crudely, We fragmented it, and then we say, look how it's all in fragments. We couldn't, of course, achieve well-educatedness just like this. First level science educatedness. What we would have to do is build a social structure of intermediate institutions that would get us from the hard sciences, so to speak, to the generally educated person via a whole series of intermediate steps. We haven't done that. And so part of what is attacking our democracy, so to speak, what's in conflict with it, is the very fragmentation of knowledge that seems to make us as individual citizens powerless, right? How can we know about those things? Right? Dunning-Kruger effect aside, right? That we think we know, because in fact we don't. We measure ourselves by the broken standard. With me? Okay. So if we read, it was just here a little while ago, Elijah Milgram on what is that thing called?
The Great Endarkment?
The Great Endarkment, thanks. Yeah. The Great Endarkment, which is the way that the Enlightenment has kind of self-destructed, under-attacked itself by producing all of this knowledge that then comes back to us all fragmented in ways that produces a Tower of Babel. That's what the image that's on the cover, because none of the experts can talk to each other. And he gives lots of little sort of sociological studies of cases where experts, even in closely allied fields, can't understand each other beyond a certain level. Yeah.
Can you help me just a little bit more? So it sounded like you said that for Aristotle, the fragmentation of knowledge would be a threat to democracy, and like you're saying, it gives this Tower of Babel thing where the experts can't talk to one another. I mean, I guess I could see how it would interfere with, cooperative, or sort of group collaborative enterprises. But beyond that, is there any more to the idea that the fragmentation of knowledge is a threat to democracy? Can you help me a little bit more to see it?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of the kinds of arguments that have gotten a certain amount of press lately. Even at the level of the kind of knowledge that somebody has to have in order to make it an informed decision about whether or not a candidate is a viable candidate, can actually, do some of the things they claim to be able to do, is itself beyond the reach of a whole lot of people. So that's just what kind of learning would you need to do that? And that's not necessarily all by itself, actually. But notice that some element of economics might come into it, right? So you might have to be able to evaluate, to some degree, even if they're fairly elementary, economic arguments. But these economic arguments are themselves sort of hostage to larger bodies of economic expertise. How far should you go in this area? Well, most of us can take a few steps, right? And then even well-educated people can take a few steps. And then they have to say, I don't know what happens after that. That's too complicated. And then the experts say, yes, it's very complicated. And now you've got a case where when you trickle that back down again, right, you don't know really. And that comes across this way. The experts disagree about these things. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no one you can appeal to really tell you what to think. So what do you do? That's a little bit of yeah, go ahead.
I guess I was thinking there could be two different things, because it sounded like what you were just saying was that, well, if we don't have this broad-based knowledge, which, enables us to select sort of competent experts or whatever, then we'll elect like bad people or incompetent people, and we'll have bad policies and stuff like that. So that's one thing you could say, which that's not so much we wouldn't have democracy, it's just we would have kind of like a bad one or one bad result. So I was also wondering if maybe you could say something stronger in that this fragmentation sort of disaggregates the community, and so if there's some kind of richer sense of community or something that we need to have.
Well, of course, you could go in that direction. Yeah. So part of the fragmentation is that when people talk to each other about important issues of public concern, they fragment, right? Because the thought of a standard of judgment or something to appeal to that could unite them is missing. And so it always seems like a power struggle. And so it's simply, you're discredited because you're a Republican, I'm discredited because I'm a Democrat, someone else is discredited because they're a Christian, someone else is discredited because they're not. Right, and the thought is, that's what it's like. It's just a war of words. There's no credible, socially constructed, demonstrably successful standard that we can appeal to.
Yeah, instead of shared rational norms settling a dispute, it's...
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think the thought for us, and that's why I think that gives it a certain amount of, something that should interest us, is it's a model. Right? Here's somebody a long time ago in a simpler epistemic world, but trying to think about these problems and thinking about the institutions, the political institutions that we would need to realize it. So let me just give an example of that for a second. I'm being a little here and there, but I hope I'm building a little bit of a picture. So let's go to the ethics, but let's not go to chapter 1, book 1, chapter 2. So we're reading along in the ethics, and we finished chapter 1, and now we come to it's pretty short. Now we come to chapter 2. And I'm just going to read it to you and give you you'll see how it comes directly to bear on what we propose there. If then there's some end of things doable in action that we wish for because of itself, and the others because of it, and we do not choose everything because of something else, since if that were the case, it would go on without limit. So the desire would be empty and pointless. It's clear that this will be the good, that is, the best good. Hence, regarding our life as well, won't knowing the good, won't knowing the good have great influence? And like archers with a target, won't we be better able to hit what we should? If so, we should try to grasp in outline at least what the good is, and to which of the sciences or capacities it properly belongs. So, okay, we get the picture. Right? It would be good if we knew what the overall good was, because we'd have a better chance of getting it if we did. And so now we get, what body of knowledge would get us to, roughly the measuring stick that we should use for general things, namely the human good or human welfare or some such notion as that. It would seem, he says, to be the science with the most control and the most architectonic one, roughly the one that sits at the top of the pile of sciences directing them. And politics seems to be like this, political science, since it's the one that prescribes which of the sciences need to exist in cities. Notice what expertises should be present, right? And which ones each group in cities should learn, and up to what point. Indeed, we see that even the capacities that are generally most honored are subject to politics. For example, generalship, household management, and rhetoric. And since it uses the other practical sciences, and furthermore legislates about what must be done and what avoided, its end will circumscribe or encompass those of the others, so it will be the human good. So what have we just done? Well, we've said, here's a kind of expertise, the one with the most largest compass, dealing with human affairs, political science, the one that applies to the polis, which is the autonomous or relatively self-sufficient political entity and the only one. All of this has to be established, of course. But the thought is, this one, it actually decides which kinds of expertise should be present, organizes the institutions in which to produce its practitioners, arranges for them to be tested, certified, and all those other things, right? And then uses their input to make its decisions. That's the model, right? And so you see that, right, we're thinking, how would we do that? And that requires that the politicians, the ones who are making the selection, are able to do this on what you might think of reasonable standards. But notice that their reasonable standards can't be the ones of the experts, right? They are looking at those and trying to decide who's an expert, who should we listen to? And that's not just this, that suddenly a bunch of people come into the room, each one claiming to be an expert. And now you have to decide who it is. It would rather be the way we do it when we select a doctor. There are good medical students. They're already certified, right? We know that people who go to one of them and come out in the top 10% of their class are pretty good. We're not just, you know, we ourselves, so the state, so to speak, or the polis, it constructs the apparatus, the machines that produce these people, and that certifies them. So there's a whole set of epistemic norms and apparatus already in play when we make a decision about which of these ones we should be listening to. It's not as if we do it out in the cold. So there's a lot of knowledge socially embodied, right, in all of this that then comes into play to the politician. So what we might think of as a political problem, democratic political problem, is what intermediate institutions should we be producing? How would we design them? How would we construct their curricula so that the occupants of them could negotiate in a trustworthy sort of way between people in the hard sciences, say, and people making political decisions? There might be a whole set of layers. So we see this role, by and large, to scientific journalists, right? People who write popular books in science. Some of them are very, very good. They know a lot. They're not scientifically uneducated, but they're not practicing scientists either. But they know enough to be able to listen to the scientist, ask the right questions, and then to paint a reasonably accurate picture of what the scientist is telling us in terms that we can understand. Right? This is the problem of informed consent in its most general sort of form, and one of its most general forms, right? Where the problem of our understanding enough to make an autonomous decision requires a way of informing us that's sufficiently accurate that a decision based on it can be a good one without being itself an expert picture. When our doctor tries to tell us what's wrong with us, right, that's often what doctors have to resort to, right? They have to try to paint a broad picture that we can understand, talk a little bit about risks and upsides and downsides in a way that we can understand, and then we make a decision. It's not an expert decision, but it's not an uninformed one either. It's reasonable enough in the context for us to think that's as good as it gets. We can't get better without rushing off and quickly getting a scientific education of our own, by which time we'll probably be dead. Right? So that's as good as it gets. Now, since you've all read The Republic, you'll remember the myth of the metals, right? And the so-called lies of the brewers. Right? So this is the problem of informed consent. Plato takes it up. How do experts tell non-experts good enough stories about reality that the non-experts can make reasonable decisions? That's a deep problem. It's a negotiating problem between different levels of epistemic insight. And we need, and we have not, I think, as a society, we're not alone, been very good at seeing it as a problem and thinking about how to solve it. That's the way that empowers democratic citizens, right? It says, no, of course you're not an expert, but here's somebody that you can trust to present you with the decision you're facing in terms you can understand in such a way that the decision that you make is not going to just be directly undercut. It matters that I won't dwell on this. It matters that our democracy and our economic system are not made for each other. There is no particular reason to think that a capitalist free enterprise system and democracy fit together. So the idea of contemporary so-called liberal democracy is not guaranteed to be something that we can make good sense of, because the pressures of one set of interests and the other are probably in conflict with one another. At least there's a problem. Maybe we can solve it, but it's not obvious to me that we can. So, are you with me on the, you see where so we started with the opening sentence. Every craft and every method of inquiry, that led us off to talk about methods of inquiry. Now, if you read, which I recommend that you do, the rest of the chapter on parts of animals, it will give you a little bit of a picture of what, how Aristotle thinks about these methodologies, and how he's thinking about what a methodology in natural science would be like. That'll tell you, he wants me to learn this about natural science so that I can make decisions about what kinds of things look right to be natural science. So if somebody comes along and tells me, right, they can do this, and this is how it goes in their science, I can think, that couldn't be, that's impossible, right? So that's a way to start. Okay? All right, so that's one. Now let's move on to the second paragraph of chapter 1, book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. A certain difference, however, appears to exist among ends. For some are activities, while others are works of some sort beyond the activities. But wherever there are ends beyond the actions, in those cases the works are naturally better than the activities. But since there are many sorts of actions and of crafts and sciences, their ends are many as well. For health is the end of medicine, a ship of shipbuilding, victory of generalship, and wealth of household management. Some of these fall under one capacity, however. Now, we're going to claim and then we're going to back away from it in the third paragraph. But let's look at the opening sentence of the second paragraph. A certain difference, however, appears to exist among ends. For some are activities, while others are works of some sort beyond the activities themselves. What does that mean? Are these technical terms too? Well, by now you know the answer. Yes, they are. So, ends, an end, telos, teleology, telic, all those notions. Some are activities, energeia, a Greek term invented by Aristotle. As no other, Aristotle invented it. As he invented entelikeia, actuality, which pretty much means the same, except one's got a tel root, right? One's about end, and the other is about action, going towards the end. But both are inventions of Aristotle's. They're not ordinary Greek terms. What about, for some are activities, energeia, while others are works. What are works? Well, often it's translated as function, or it's the word, ergon, that also gets translated as function. So when we reach book 1, chapter 7, when we come across the famous function argument, as a kind of foundational argument for what happiness is for Aristotle, what the ultimate goal of ethics is, the term for function is ergon. So ergon goes in two directions, right? And we have to find out what those are. So, certain difference among ends. Some are activities, while others are works of some sort beyond the activities themselves. Look at the Aristotle Metaphysics, out, Beta 6. This is about what activities are. I'm going to read it to you. We're going to go through it together. And we'll see that we instantly run into heavy water. And then we're going to try to say a little bit about what that water is and why it's heavy. And then we'll look at a passage in the Nicomachean Ethics in book 9, where Aristotle was talking about pleasure. And what does pleasure turn out to be? It turns out to be unimpeded activity, the very notion we have here, with an elaborate set of claims about what activities are that are part of the as I would say, Aristotle's metaphysics of morals. So if we're overdoing, has everyone read Kant's fundamental groundwork of the metaphysics of morals? Not everyone has read that. You don't have to be ashamed, you just have to read it. Right? Everyone starts by not having read things, and then eventually they have read them, so it's fine. That's just, it's not.
Which one's worse, David?
What?
Which one's worse, being ashamed or having to read Kant?
Well, that's an interesting question. The best way to read Kant is to have read them.
Done.
I have, so I don't need to read it anymore. Though I do, of course, because I teach it like that. And Kant, like Aristotle, is an acquirer. After you get into Königsberg and you've moved around there for a while and you start thinking in terms of Kant-like notions, when you come across weird stuff in there, you just think, oh yeah, of course, yeah. The transcendental unity of our perception, I know what that is. Yeah, and so on. Every time transcendental occurs, you know, you're in la la land. So, back to metaphysics 6, which is not la la land yet. Since we've spoken about the capacity or potentiality, the dunamis, the power, capacity, potentiality, that set of things with reference to movement, so things that have a potential, where the potential when actualized is a movement, a kinesis, another technical term, contrasted in a moment with activity. Let's make some distinctions concerning activity, both concerning what it is and what sort of thing it is. That's a technical distinction. What it is, what sort of thing it is. Te and poion, te. What it is and what sort of thing it is. We don't need to worry about it for now. We'll come across it. It has to do with how Aristotle thinks you should define things. For the capable too will at the same time become clear as we make our determinations. Because we do not say only of that which naturally moves something else or is moved by something else that it's capable, whether unconditionally or in a certain way, another technical distinction, but also use the terms in a different way, which is why in the course of our inquiry we went through the former. We've done that a minute ago. Activity then is the existence of the things not in the way in which we say it exists potentially. So it's in contrast with potential. And we say, for example, that Hermes exists potentially in the wood. That is the statue of Hermes. Right? This wood is potentially a statue of Hermes. Right? That sort of thing. And the half line in the whole. Right? If I cut the line in half, I would have two half lines. So the half line is potential in the whole line. Because it could be abstracted from. And also we say that even someone who's not contemplating, I'm not actually now thinking scientific thoughts, is a scientific knower if he's capable of contemplating. And by contrast, we say that other things exist actively. Okay? So we're getting the intuition, you know, the kind of intuition pumps, the little things that are supposed to guide us in the right direction. What we wish to say is clear from the particular cases by induction, and we mustn't look for a definition of everything, but be capable of comprehending the analogy, namely, now we're going to get it. So here we're reaching definitional bedrock. We can't define these notions. We have to get the hang of them from examples. That's the basic, the bottom line. We can't define these. So this is a bit like if you know Strawson's book Individuals, where Strawson says, when we reach the distinction between universals and particulars, subjects and predicates, roughly, we've reached the frege, concept and object, right? We've reached bedrock. We can't get below this. Why? Well, because every particular is an instance of type or universal, so it embodies the very thing we're trying to separate it from, and by the same token, every universal exists only in a particular, at least if you're not a Platonist, and that too causes us our spades turn. We can't get beneath them to explain them in terms of something else. right? The inscription, the type, the token seem to be given together. So that's where we are. We're kind of at the bottom, except for Aristotle. Particularity and universality are not basic. They can be explained in terms of possibility and actuality. A universal is a possibility. It's an instance, is an activation or actualization of that. And now potentiality and actuality have become the basic notions. So here's what's going to give us the intuitive grip on these notions. As what is building is in relation to what is, as we say, actually what is building, what is doing some building, is in relation to what's capable of building. What is awake is in relation to what is asleep. What is seeing is in relation to what has eyes closed but has sight. What has been shaped out of matter is in relation to the matter. And what has been finished off is to the unfinished. If the difference exemplified in this analogy, let the activity be marked off by the first part, the potentiality by the second. But things are said to actively be not all in the same way. So we're going to break up or break into the notion of activity or actuality, right? And show that it's not all just one. There are different kinds of it that'll help us to understand it better, even if we can't define it, right? Not all in the same way, but by analogy. As this is in this or to this, so that is in that or to that. For some are as movement in relation to a capacity or a potential, and the others as substance to some sort of matter. So we're getting a distinction between, right, some are as movement to a capacity, and others as substance, another technical term, to matter, another technical term. But roughly speaking, right, the blob of wax not made into the statue is matter for the statue, which takes on a certain form to be the statue. That's crude enough, but good enough for now. But the unlimited, the void, and things like that are said to be potentially or actively in another way from many of the other beings. For example, from what sees or walks or is seen. For the latter things can sometimes also be truly said to be unconditionally. For what's seen is said to be seen on the one hand because it is being seen, and on the other because it's capable of being seen. But the unlimited is potential not in that way, namely that it will be actually separable, but in coming to be. So Aristotle doesn't think there are any actual infinities. They're all potential. It's rather, it's infinite because you can move on, not because it's a finished infinite. For it is the divisions not coming to an end that allows this activity to be potential, not the unlimited's being separate, right? It's because you don't ever finish that it's unlimited, not because it's out there and you're still going towards something that's already out there. That's all. Aristotle gives elaborate arguments for this, got a lot to be said for it. They're complicated, we don't need to worry about it. Since though of the act, now we're getting in, since though of the actions that have a limit, none is an end, but all are in relation to an end. This takes us back to the ethics, right? Some are ends and other as activities. Some are ends, some are works that are beyond the activities, some are the activities. Since though of the actions that have a limit, none is an end, but all are in relation to an end. For example, making thin. Oh, right? That's in relation to being thin. You're slimming or going on a diet or doing those things that will make you thin. For the things themselves, when one is making them thin, are in movement in this way, namely that what the movement is for the sake of does not yet belong to it. You're only making it thin because it's not yet thin, right? Once it is thin, you can't keep on making it thin, right? It's just like you can't keep building the house once you build it. These movements are not cases of actions, at least not of complete action, since none is an end. That tells us that a complete action is an end. Remember that the ethics is practical, which comes from praxis. Practicos comes from praxis, which means action. It really should be translated as something like action-related, where action is a technical term being explained here. So a complete action, that's an activity. That's something that's an end. An incomplete one, related to an end, is not a complete action. So this is there's a crucial bit, maybe the crucial bit of Aristotle's metaphysics of morals, is to understand what action is. And this is his attempt to tell us. These actions are not cases of action, at least not of complete action, since none is an end, but the sort in which the end belongs really is an action. For example, at the same time, one is seeing a thing and has seen it, is thinking something and has thought it, is understanding something and has understood it, whereas it's not the case that at the same time one is learning something and has learned it, nor that one is being made healthy and has been made healthy. Someone who is living well, however, at the same time, happiness, eupratein, or eupratein, as a synonym for eudaimonia, which is what we translate as happiness. Happiness is, unfortunately for us, an abstract noun. For Aristotle, it's a verb. It's a participle, it's an active notion. And that's going to turn out to be true of a lot of things. God is a verb for Aristotle, and being, not surprisingly, is a verb for him too. Verbs for Aristotle, well, where the action is, that's a nice little joke. Verbs are where the action is, not nouns, adjectives, adverbs, right? In that sense, he's a bit of a Heraclitean. It's all about movement, or the like activity, action, not about, right, the metaphysics of presence, as Derrida calls it. It's not really about, like, hunks of self-identical en soi, or sorry, right, permanent little unmovable atoms. It's about actions. Even Aristotelian elements are in tension. They're active little modules, not passive little permanences. Okay. Someone who's living well, however, at the same time has lived well and is happy and has been happy. If this were not so, these would have to come to an end at some time, as when one is making thin. If being happy were like making thin, it would have to stop, right? Because it would have to stop when it reached its end. That doesn't sound good. We don't want that. We want to be able to be happy, as it were, permanently, and yet, as Aristotle would say, not be dead when we're happy. So we want to be actively happy. How can we be that? Only because happiness is an activity. If it were anything else, we couldn't be it all the time, right? But as things stand, it's not so, but one is living and has lived. Of these, then, one sort should be called movements and the other activities, for every movement is incomplete. For example, making thin, burning, walking, building. These are movements, and are certainly incomplete. For it's not the case that at the same time one is walking and has taken a walk, nor that one is building and has built it, or is coming to be and has come to be, or is being moved and has been moved, but they're different, as are one's moving and having moved something. By contrast, the same thing at the same time has seen and is seen, is understood and has understood. The latter sort, then, I call an activity, therefore, movement. Now, that's not clear, right? And I'm going to say a few things to help clarify it, and then I'll do it by telling you a little story about it. So first is that the distinction here of verbs, linguistic distinction, is between verbs where the present entails the perfect. Are seeing, have seen. This is a distinction not of tense. They're not, it's not that one is tense, one is present, and the other is past. They're what's known in linguistics as aspect difference. It's an aspective difference of the verb. So it's the same thing. At the moment that you are seeing, you have seen now at that moment. Not that you had seen in the past, but right now in the present you are seeing and have seen simultaneously, right? So it's an aspective difference. Well, this distinction of aspect, so this little passage, generated a whole world of linguistic investigation and discovery. Some of it done here by a philosopher named Zeno Vendler, who wrote a book called Verbs and Times. And verbings, the discussion of verbs in linguistics and in philosophy started from, a lot of it, from this passage. And there's now a massive literature on this, on aspect. So from a linguistic point of view, this is a robust distinction, right, in the sense that it's well recognized in linguistics that some verbs have this aspective quality and others don't. So in that sense, you might say, well, if we're just looking at linguistic categories, these are genuine linguistic categories. So if we were thinking not of metaphysics, but of verbs, we could say, yeah, activity verbs and movement verbs, or verbs of verbs that have this feature that they're present in tails that are perfect. These are real differences in verbs. Okay? So linguistically, that's fine. It's ontologically that is different. What are the ontological correlates of a verb that has this feature, like thinking, understanding, being pleased, being happy, where the present entails the perfect? What are the ontological correlates of those? You might say, what is an activity? And you can see that it's kind of mysterious, right? Because it seems like this. It seems like moving at a point, right? So it seems that there's something going on, but it's temporally without extent. It's going on at an instant. Well, when we think about movement, right, we think, well, no movement at an instant. It's got to be delta t, right? You have to have an increment of time for there to be movement. You can't have movement at an actual point. So what we seem to have is something that's, well, like movement, it's active, but it does occur at a point. And that's rather difficult to get your mind around. You agree? But that's the key to Aristotelian little picture. So God is an activity. He's contemplating, which is one of these verbs. So he both is contemplating and has contemplated at every moment. He's, in this way, Aristotle says, he's outside time, right? Because nothing he does takes any time, right? He's not on his way to anything. He's always fully at his goal. He's always there. He says that state which we sometimes are in, he's always in. And he's more in it than we are, right? Because he's never not in it, right? That's the best. That's what happiness is. We approximate to it when we contemplate him. So when we get to the last book of the Ethics, and this is in the Politics too, right? When we get to 1068 of the Ethics, we find that there are two ways to be happy. One is muddling around down here doing politics and ethics, ethical things, and the other is to contemplate. And that's the best kind of happiness, because that's the kind God has. And when we're in that beatific state of, right, which the mystics think, in which we're at one with the object of thought, there's no me, no way to kind of Zen-like full presence in something, that's it, man. That's what you want. That's the best thing. Right? That's what it's all about. That's where we should be going. But notice that that comes from the intersection of a whole set of thoughts, not just one. Right? One is about what kinds of things are suited to be ends. It has to be something that's an activity. Otherwise, there'd be a further end. Right? And once we're sort of there, the only question is, which one of those, though, is the best one? And you can sort of see why you might end up in the contemplative one. But we'll get there by slow degrees. That's just the quick and dirty version. That comes out of the second paragraph of the first chapter of the Nicomachean Ethics, right? The difference between activities and things that have a further end is that distinction. Already the metaphysics is on the line as something that you're supposed to understand and say yes to. Yeah.
Sorry, so I'm having a hard time with, I guess maybe even the linguistic distinction, let alone
Yeah.
the So I think, I'll take an example with seeing, right?
Yeah.
And I think, well, I can kind of get that, because I think anytime I can say that I'm seeing,
Yeah.
I can also say I have seen.
Yeah.
Right? But that just makes me think, well, yeah, that, I mean, it's not entailment, but, like, to see is just, it also, you have seen. But then I think, well, I feel like I can do this with every other kind of action, right? So anytime I can say that I'm walking, I say like, well, yeah, there's one instance in which I have walked, this one, the one in which,
And so leave that out. Maybe there are areas, and so that's one that people have focused on, I believe. I can tell you much about how to deal with them. But people have focused on that because they've thought, oh, this is not a robust distinction. So the famous article by John Ackrow, who was a major Aristotle scholar of the second part of the last century, Ackrow raises exactly this question. He says, well, I mean, it looks good, but, there are a lot of things we don't know where to put them, right? Like walking, right? It's so true that I both am walking and have walked, but Aristotle gives it. Notice I put taking a walk, not walking, because I think that actually he's thinking of the walk you're taking. I'm going to walk from here to Sparta, right? I'm going to take a walk from here, and I won't. He's not just thinking of walking. But what we would have to do to handle some of the problematic cases about where we would put them is we would have to look into the physics about how Aristotle thinks of moving. So when do you start walking? So get up, get up. So it's an intentional activity, right? So you form an intention, you're going to walk. Now you're putting the intention into effect, right? So if you had a sudden stroke, nothing else would happen, right? You don't have a sudden stroke, your foot starts to move, right? Okay, now when did the walk start? So on Aristotle's view, it starts, right? Indeed, maybe the true action is the putting of the intention into effect. Now let's switch over to Königsberg for a minute. Remember Kant, right? So, there you are, you're as innocent as can be, and I, alas, am planning to shoot you. I have a high-powered rifle, I take aim at you through the sight, I pull the trigger. A bird flies into the path of the bullet, takes the hit, you don't even notice it, you walk on. My